Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. Nice to have you. Welcome to our December 2023 Connect-OC Coalition meeting. We're going to get started here in just a moment. But for now, thank you all for joining. It's nice to see you all. Just a quick note about who we are. So the Connect-OC Coalition is a program of Partners for Wellness funded through the Orange County Healthcare Agency Office of Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Services Act. We are tasked with focusing on promoting existing mental health resources here in the county and accessible to those in the county for transitional age youth ages 16 to 24, now expanding that to ages 12 to 24. And so really our focus is, we talk about this way all the time, that there are a lot of really good resources out there, a lot of really good tools and services available to those who are dealing with mental health challenges or are hoping to see some support towards their mental wellness in that age demographic, as well as for those who love and care for and support those in that age demographic. But one of the challenges that people often run into is they don't know that those services exist or how to access them. So a large part of what we do is helping folks better become aware of those services and how to utilize them and when they might be useful for them. We do that a variety of ways, including one of those ways is this meeting, which we host monthly, usually on the last Friday of the month. But this month, given the December holidays, we've moved it up a little bit earlier, as we've done the last couple of years. So thank you all again for joining us. My name is David Pattison. I'm the project coordinator for Connect-OC. And then I'll go ahead and introduce my colleagues by name and let them just share with you their role quickly. And then we'll move into our topic for today's meeting, which I'm excited to share with you all. So Crystal, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you here and excited about this topic, like David said. So I'm Crystal Bleischer. I'm the program director with Partners for Wellness and specifically overseeing our transitional age youth community networking project, which is Connect-OC. And thank you for all being a part of it. I know many of you have been with this project since we started back in 2020. So this is our third year. And happy to have you all here, and especially here in December with the holidays and everything else going on. So thanks.
I'll go. Good morning. I'm Sarah Chalice. I'm one of the health educators on the team. I just oversee social media and do a little bit of the event planning and things like that. So Vivi, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vivi. I'm also a health educator here in this project. I basically work with Sarah on a lot of those things, and I'm really excited to hear more about this topic.
Hello, my name is Camila Aro, and I'm also one of the educator interns, and I also work with Sarah and Vivi.
Thanks, team. So I'm excited for the topic for today. We got a little bit of adjustment here, last minute changes. I'll share with you in just a moment. But our topic for today, for those of you who may not have seen on the email, is the intersection of housing insecurity, homelessness, and transitional age youth mental health. And this is obviously a hot topic here in general across the country, especially here in Southern California, and also here in Orange County. The question of homelessness and how best to support those who are at risk for homelessness, or who might be currently dealing with some level of housing insecurity. And so that includes transitional age youth. And we want to look at the ways that intersects with their mental health bidirectionally, right? So both the ways that mental health concerns that are untreated or undertreated can exacerbate a risk for housing insecurity, as well as the ways that housing insecurity can negatively impact mental health, and what we can do about that. That's a big part of our focus here. Our panelists today, for those who saw the agenda, one of our panelists is Dr. Jason Schiffman, who is with Thrive Together OC and UC Irvine's LEAP research team and their lab there, really doing some important and innovative research around psychosis, early detection, and early intervention, especially for this age demographic. Unfortunately, Dr. Schiffman reached out to me this morning, and he had a sudden emergency come up and won't be able to join us. We're hoping to have him back on again. He was really excited to be here and really sends his regards and his regrets that he can't make it this morning. But I want to encourage everyone in the meanwhile to look up Thrive Together OC. I do know that we have, I think I saw Cindy on the call here. Thanks, Cindy, for joining us. They're doing some really amazing work in terms of applying that research, looking at ways that we can detect early signs of psychosis and what we can do to intervene early and help those who might be at risk or showing early signs of psychosis get the support and care they need to thrive. And I think one of the important things that I walked away from, not only speaking with Dr. Schiffman, not only attending actually a talk of his earlier this year, but learning more about Thrive Together OC, is that it's important for us to think about, for one of the types of stigma that are around homelessness is that those who experience psychosis or disorders where psychosis might be a feature, right? There's this general sense that, okay, well, there's a certain level of hopelessness there. That person is destined to a variety of difficulties that there's not a whole lot we can do about. Kind of the popular thought. This often extends into popular way of thinking about homelessness, right? The way we think about or talk about those who are experiencing homelessness. And the sense that those who experience psychosis are kind of at an inevitable path or on an inevitable path towards homelessness and other social issues. And frankly, the matter of the fact, both in terms of research and in the excellent work that Thrive Together OC and other folks like them are doing, is that that doesn't have to be the case. If we can detect early and intervene early for those who are experiencing psychosis or at risk of experiencing psychosis, we can really make some powerful and meaningful change in their lives and in the lives of those who love them and care for them. And so I'm excited. I encourage you, one, to look up Thrive Together OC. I know Crystal posted the text in the meeting. Cindy just shared a little something as well. And I'm excited to eventually get Dr. Schiffman here on one of our meetings and let him share about the work. I am very excited about who we still have joining us, Shelby, with Project Hope Alliance. I'm really excited, both from my conversation with her and my reading about Project Hope Alliance and the work that they do, to introduce her to you and let her tell you a bit more about the work they're doing. But it's also some really crucial work around supporting families and youth and young adults and little ones as well who are at risk for housing insecurity, as well as a number of other related concerns. So Shelby, without further ado, thank you for joining us. I'll pass it on to you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the group and then telling us about the work of Project Hope Alliance.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, David and everyone else. My name is Shelby Feliciano-Sabala. I'm the Chief Partnership Officer here at Project Hope Alliance. So we work with students experiencing homelessness as young as 5 all the way through age 24. So in my role, I get to oversee our programming, all of our case managers, our district managers, as well as our public partnerships with our schools and our cities and public officials. The work that we do is unique in the sense that we are embedded on school campuses. So we meet our youth where they're at. As transportation is a large barrier for many youth experiencing homelessness, we mitigate that by meeting them on their school campus and embedded there. My background, I'm a social worker. I've been in youth development and really education for about 15 years. I've been in higher ed when I was at the University of Washington in Seattle. And then here locally, I've worked at large and small nonprofits, really focused on youth development, workforce readiness, education. And now here I am at Project Hope Alliance, and it's amazing to be a part of this very impactful work for our most vulnerable youth in Orange County. I'm excited to be here with you all and offer some hope and some strength about these strong youth that we work with every day.
Great. Thank you again, Shelby, for joining us. Maybe to start off with, I know this is a feature on the website and we talked a little bit about it the other day, but I'd love to hear a bit about Project Hope Alliance's story. What inspired Project Hope Alliance? What brings you all to doing this kind of work?
Yeah, so we actually started with a need in a table in the back of a church, where people were like, oh, hey, kids need transportation to school, kids need essentials. It wasn't until probably 10 years ago when our CEO, Jennifer Friend, came to the organization who had experienced homelessness herself. She was a partner at a law firm and a trial lawyer, and she completely shifted and came over to Project Hope Alliance to run this organization. I think when it started, it was like a $30,000, it was, like I said, a table in a church. There was this one school, and now 10 years later, we're serving over 400 youth and their siblings and families in Orange County. And what started as, just meeting youth with what they needed has really become a very expansive 24/7 trauma-informed case management program. So while, yes, we provide some basic needs, pantry, hygiene, laundry kits, what we're really doing is we're walking alongside our youth with them. We're meeting them exactly where they're at to help them dream, develop passions, and thrive. Jennifer always says we're playing block and tackle. And I really like that analogy because we're just the ones maybe moving things out of the way, advocating, asking questions of counselors, administrators, coaches, community facilitators, and then we get to then fill in that gap and again, just let our youth lead.
I love that, Shelby. And it's such an important perspective in terms of, we often think in our field about service provision. What are the things people need and how can we get those things to them? But one of the other important considerations are what's in the way, what's preventing somebody from accessing the things they need or utilizing the resources that are already available to them or thriving in those contexts which are typical for them, right? So in education or housing or whatever it might be, what can we do to get those things out of the way as well as provide important services? I know in our conversation the other day, you had mentioned that many of the students that you all serve qualify through McKinney-Vento. Can you talk a bit about what is that? What is McKinney-Vento? How does one qualify? And what kind of needs does that qualification represent? So what kind of needs do those who qualify through the McKinney-Vento program or act, what kind of needs do they often experience? What qualifies them to participate?
Yeah, so there's two different federal definitions of homelessness. The first is the HUD definition, which often means shelters or what they say literally homeless. So I think when people are thinking of homelessness, especially in Orange County, right, it is a hot button, it's a hot topic. They're typically thinking just living on the street. The educational McKinney-Vento definition that public educational institutions use is the lack of a fixed and adequate nighttime residence. What that can look like is about 4 criteria. So oftentimes our youth may be living in motels with their families, maybe living unhoused, living in cars, or couch surfing is another really big one. And then living doubled up or tripled up. So what that looks like in practice is multiple families living in one house, sometimes families living in a garage with no kitchen, maybe no electricity, no adequate running water. And so it's really that lack of a fixed and stable nighttime residence. I think that is one of the really big tensions in this work. So for instance, it's starting in January. It's the point in time count. I don't know if others are familiar, but that is the typical way. And it's driven by HUD of how we count our youth, our families, our people experiencing homelessness. And it is through the federal HUD definition. And so the last point in time count counted 722 youth experiencing homelessness. The way they count that is hotspots or shelters. So they're like, oh, here's a hotspot of homelessness. But we know that family homelessness looks different. It's a lack of adequate and fixed nighttime residence. So and actually it's even still under-identified, but through the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness in Orange County, that number's closer to 25,000. And so we are serving in 3 districts and 1 charter organization. Santa Ana, Huntington, and Newport Mesa. And we are serving 400 youth and their families and siblings through that. So the supports look different, right? It's sometimes it is, I need shoes. Sometimes it's, hey, I want to play soccer, and we're going to provide cleats. We're going to help introduce them to the coach, see what needs to be done for them to participate in soccer, or any of those traditional school experiences, right? As we all know, senior year is replete with so many of those memories. So while they'll get a cap and gown through, McKinney-Vento does provide different pieces. Usually transportation is the form of a bus pass, right? If they're living in Anaheim and they want to go to their home school in Costa Mesa, they could be taking 3 buses. So that can contribute to absenteeism, maybe tardies in certain periods. And while, yes, it's great to get a cap and gown, we also help them participate in grad night. Senior photos, we help with professional photography, getting their makeup done, going to the senior prom, getting dresses and tuxes to wear to that, the Uber, the meal beforehand. So all of those pieces are really crucial because that offers a sense of belonging. And I think when we're not recognizing this crisis that we have in Orange County with McKinney-Vento, and all we're focusing on in this point in time is often our youth are invisible and their needs are invisible to be part of that school community. And McKinney-Vento is in every single school district, every single school. It is not just a concentrated problem in maybe Title I or low socioeconomic status, low SES communities. McKinney-Vento students live everywhere. And the way to identify is through self-identification. So oftentimes the applications will say, are you homeless, yes or no? But with that kind of question, there could be stigma attached to it. So that's something we work very closely with our partners in, is maybe redesigning that question of, explain your nighttime residence. Does it look like any of these? And really giving them the options and the safety, because it's like, hey, we can get you resources if you do qualify under this.
Yeah. Shelby, thank you. I think we touched on a lot there that I think I want to highlight a couple of pieces. First, I want to mention, you mentioned the point in time count, and for those in the community who are unfamiliar and who are maybe asking the question, I know homelessness is a large issue in my community. I want to help. I don't know where to get started. One valuable way where you can get started is participating something like the point in time count, where you actually go out in a structured way and connect with people who are experiencing housing insecurity in the context of what we often think of, maybe something more along the lines of chronic homelessness, or living outside, living in a vehicle, in a like as you put a hotspot area, maybe like at a park or something along those lines. Those are a place where you can start to connect with people, learn a bit about who they are, learn their stories, which can also be really important. We're going to touch back on that a little while later as we talk about something we recently did for our Instagram as Instagram Live. But that's a great place to get started. That happens in every city here in the county in an organized fashion, something you can participate in. I'm going to look and see if anybody has some information. Oh, Steve, good old Steve McNally, got it up there. Point in time count, January 2024. Volunteer sign up. I also saw, Steve, thank you, that you posted some material about the McKinney-Vento program, including the OCD webpage, as well as some contacts from McKinney-Vento for those who want to learn more or find a way to get connected and get involved. But Shelby, I also want to talk about, as you pointed out, the point in time count captures a certain segment of those who are experiencing housing insecurity or homelessness. But it because of its definition, because of its focus on things like chronic homelessness, it misses a lot as well. I mean, it's a question of purpose. Its focus is really on those who are experiencing chronic homelessness in this very particular way. But by expanding the number, like you said, from about 700 or so to 25,000, this really blows open the scope of what we're talking about here in terms of housing insecurity for K through 12, for children up to 24 here in Orange County. And it's important for us to be aware of that, to see that in some ways the problem is larger than we already imagined, but it's happening in places we don't realize or imagine that it's happening. And that can kind of shift not only our mentality, our way of thinking about homelessness, but the way also we respond to the question. So that's an important figure, an important thing for folks to be thinking about. I also want to highlight something that you were talking about there, Shelby, that when we talk about housing insecurity, we're often talking about a series of challenges or events or difficulties or other insecurities that compound to create issues. When you talked about the example of the student who currently is living in Anaheim, because that's where the closest thing to a regular kind of housing is available to them, but their home school is in Costa Mesa, then the difficulties they have to go through to get there may mean a risk of absenteeism or truancy that is not intended. It's just a circumstantial issue, but that can create all sorts of other problems in terms of difficulty getting through schooling, both practically in terms of being present in class, but also in terms of from discipline perspective and even a legal perspective at a certain point. And so doing work that helps remove that difficulty, helps us become more aware of that difficulty and helps address those challenges is crucial. It really moves the question forward, especially because as students experience difficulties in school as a result of housing insecurity, that increases the likelihood that housing insecurity will become more severe or more prolonged or even become chronic, right, as they move into early adulthood. And so it's an important thing to consider that when we talk about these issues, we're not talking about a singular issue, but a web of difficulties and challenges that both need service and also need, as we talked about earlier, kind of some removing of some obstacles. So I want to thank you for highlighting that. And I'll leave it to you now. You actually spoke to this question a bit more, but we were talking about really the idea here that housing insecurity and homelessness run along a spectrum, right? And they don't always look the way we typically think of when we think of homelessness or housing insecurity. So I'll open it up to you, Shelby, if you have anything more from what we were saying to comment on, and then we can move on to some other questions. But
no, I absolutely do. David, thank you. I appreciate that, because I think oftentimes when we think of chronic homelessness, we're trying to put out a fire, right? And we're trying to be responsive. What we're doing at Project Hope Alliance is we're being proactive. We truly believe, and we know because we see it daily, literally every day, that education is this transformative experience for our youth that ends generational homelessness. So we are putting our work, our belief, we're allowing dreams to happen, passions to happen, because the data says you are almost 400%, 386% more likely to be chronically homeless as an adult if you do not graduate high school. We're talking about just high school. Our graduation rate at PHA is 93%. State's average for all students is 85, and for students experiencing homelessness is 70. So that transformational experience of education, and again, we meet them where they're at. Not only is our office on campus, but we have regular meetings, weekly, monthly, with counselors, with community facilitators, with the assistant principals, with principals, to really go through, hey, this is what's going on. One of our youth was always, they were like, oh, he's having a problem. We want to have disciplinary action because he's always missing first period. Well, he was taking his younger siblings to school. So what we were able to do is work with the school and just change his schedule. But again, if our youth aren't even being seen as experiencing homelessness, how are they going to get the supports and resources that they deserve? That's just an educational right. And this system, the educational system, isn't equitable. And I think that's really where we come in. Jennifer always says she believes that everyone wants to help, but it takes a connector. And I truly believe that's what we're doing here, is we're just the one saying, hey, wait a second, what can we do here? And from school partners to community partners, we don't do this work alone. We have our partnerships are really what enable us, because we're not doing the housing piece. So we need other organizations, Families Forward, SPIN, to really help with the housing navigation. While they're doing that, we're staying with case management, right? We're like, hey, I know this is hard and it's okay to feel this way. What else can I do? Giving them the space. We have a youth center downstairs. Like during the summer, sometimes we'll just have a movie day because we have air conditioning and it's hot, right? So these little things, they seem little to us, but every day our youth are already walking in carrying so much. So we just want to reduce that load and really believe that education is the difference. Earlier, you were saying about the point in time count, and I was just on the transitional age youth, the TAY point in time count call yesterday, and they were like, hey, we need to talk to our experts. And we're all like, there's a lot of community colleges, talk to the health centers, and then talk to the basic needs centers. They're called Thrive centers because those people that are in the trenches every day with our youth, they're the ones that know who is experiencing that the housing insecurity. So when we're talking about the spectrum, I think it would really behoove us to talk about housing insecurity, couch surfing, what this can look like, because we don't want that to turn into chronic homelessness.
Yeah. When we were doing some outreach for this call, we spent some time talking to some folks at the community colleges and universities who are part of those basic needs programs. Fortunately, they weren't able to join us because, as you well know, they've got a lot going on, right, in terms of trying to support their population. But these issues don't always simply go away when somebody graduates from high school. And at the community college university level, there's some really important work, but also some important needs to be met that have the same kind of concern or impact when they go unaddressed, right? A student who's hungry, who's worried about where they're going to sleep tonight, how they're going to get back and forth from school or from school to work or whatever it might be, is going to have a lot more difficult time focusing in class, getting their schoolwork done, even at the community college and university level. And so basic needs coordinators and those kinds of programs go a long way in terms of helping connect students to services that minimize the impact of some of the challenges they're facing. It's another important place for members of the community to potentially get involved. You can reach out to community colleges and say, I'd like to know how I can help and support. You may be able to help with some of the stuff that's happening in terms around basic needs. They do things like provide transportation through bus passes, or they have food pantries, or they link to other services. So it's an important place for folks to be able to get involved, an important resource for students experiencing housing insecurity at the community college and university level. Something else I wanted to come back around to that you mentioned earlier, Shelby, is just some of the, we can lose a sense. Unfortunately, housing insecurity and homelessness can be profoundly dehumanizing. We see this most clearly at the intense chronic level of homelessness, right? Not only dehumanizing in terms of the experience of those who are dealing with homelessness or housing insecurity, but frankly, the way that we as a community sometimes deal with the question can be really dehumanizing. It's something that jumped out to me. We were talking about earlier, and you touched on this a few times. We talked about the movie, the opportunity just to get away and watch a movie in that air-conditioned space where you don't have to pay $17 for the ticket and another $30 for some food, for some snacks, right? At a movie theater. Or for the student who says, yeah, okay, he's not really thinking about the fact that he's experiencing housing insecurity. He's like, I'd like to play soccer. Is there any way that we can make that work? I can't afford the gear, or those kinds of things. Or the student who wants to go to prom, right, but can't afford a dress or getting their hair done or whatever it might be. These elements, for those who are experiencing housing insecurity, or those who are experiencing challenges of any kind, right, we always have to hold on to the fact they don't stop being human. They don't become only the challenges they're facing. All of the other things that make them human, that make a kid who wants to play soccer, or a teenager who wants to attend the prom, all of those things are still there. And so part of what we need to be mindful of doing is removing the roadblocks that get in that way, as well as providing support and services that they can't otherwise access that allow them to experience these things, because those kinds of experiences are grounding. They keep them rooted. They keep them experiencing life as meaningful. When you were talking about it, I immediately thought of things like, Viktor Frankl's idea of Man's Search for Meaning, right? The book Man's Search for Meaning, but it's also broader idea in terms of the way he approached therapy as a psychiatrist, right? In terms of this drive towards meaning. Or we talk about all the time, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but we often talk about the lower level, right? And we talk about food and water and shelter and all that, but we forget that all of that is foundational to lead us to the higher things, right? The stuff that gives life meaning. And so I think all of that is just as important and something for us to think about here too, that when we're talking about homelessness and housing insecurity, we're not talking about just resolving an issue of shelter. We're talking about all of these other things that ultimately support a young person thriving in every aspect of their lives.
Yeah, David, I think you said a lot there, but I'm going to start with the first thing you were talking about is accessing resources. And one thing that we know, and I'm sure all of us on this call know, is when you need help, you're getting like 20 brochures. And it's like, I'm tired. I don't know who to call. You call someone. And especially in Orange County, there's a lot of nonprofits. There's a lot of colleges, community colleges, and there's a lot of niche projects. And so a lot of times they're being passed around. And so it's not a safety net, it's really a web, and you can really get stuck there. And so that's something that we do with them. We'll help you with Medi-Cal, we'll help you with SNAP, and we will physically call with them so it doesn't feel so daunting and overwhelming. And I think that's really important, because it's like, yeah, I want a motel voucher, and then I need some food, and then we need some socks and shoes, right? So like you have these immediate needs, and then it's like, oh, well, I also want to get tutoring, and I want to help my A through G requirements. That's a really big thing for us. We're not just helping them graduate, but really get those A through G, be successful at a Cal State, a UC. So that's one thing. It's really difficult to navigate. The other thing, I appreciate you're talking about the deficit mindset that we often have with this population. I'm a current doctoral student, and I will be doing a study on social emotional learning for McKinney-Vento youth and how that impacts behavior, academics, and their overall school experiences. And the framework that I've been looking through is the YOSO Community Cultural Wealth, as well as Nancy Fraser. So I'll start with YOSO, because community cultural wealth is really flipping deficit-minded on its head. So our communities, as we know, have a lot of different capital. The two biggest for our students that we see daily is the resistance capital. So that's our youth showing up and saying, even though you may not have high belief in me, maybe our youth they know there's could be lower teacher expectations, right? So they're showing up every day, and they're like, I'm going to still show up. And that's that resistance capital that they're bringing. The other one is navigational capital. So there's a lot of systems, right? That's what we're talking about here, navigating them. But our youth and families, they're navigating that with grace, right? And these systems leave out, especially if they're invisible, right? And they're not even being counted. They're able to navigate all of these different systems. And we have trauma-informed care, person-centered language, constant ways that even as a team, we hold each other accountable of, hey, when we're talking about maybe there's a challenging youth or a family that might be in more crisis and might need more resources, is really reframing what's really going on here. And that's important for us to dialogue about, because we know that there's incredible potential and incredible strengths, especially in their grit, in their self-management. There's a lot of social emotional skills that are higher. And there was just a recent, I think it was an article published about that through Schoolhouse Connection, saying that McKinney-Vento youth actually do have higher SEL skills. So that's often not talked about. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And then also so Nancy Fraser, she has a theory of social justice that's called the 3 R's, that for communities to have true equity and social justice, first they need to be recognized. And so if our youth are not being counted as homeless, that's the first step is recognizing the invisibility. Then it's the representation, and it's including them in all aspects of planning, commissions, community boards, and then it's the redistribution of resources. So before we can, while there are resources out there, I know that there can be more resources once we get this discrepancy of the invisibility of McKinney-Vento youth at the forefront of our conversations.
Yeah, that's excellent. When we're talking about resources, even if they're expansive, they're always by definition going to be limited at some level. And so when we are doing planning about how we distribute resources, where we allocate them, we're going to be, we do it based off of data, right? And if we don't have the data, the problem becomes, in a certain sense, the challenge becomes invisible, or at least less visible than it needs to be. And so the more we do the good work of identifying, recognizing, as you were saying, then the more data we have of the challenges that are out there, the more, the larger portion of resources we're going to allocate to addressing that concern. Ideally, in an ideal world, on a practical level, that's how we think about it, right? I want to touch on a couple things that are in the chat, and then Shelby, I want to ask you a follow-up question. So just a couple things have been popping up in the chat. Leslie McDonald of the City of Mission Viejo has talked about some of the work that they are doing with CityNet and some of the challenges that they're facing, or some of the needs they have. And so she highlighted a couple things there. CityNet is looking for input on mapping those hotspots we talked about earlier. You can go to mapping@everyonecounts.oc.org. Excuse me. She also talked about that they're trying to figure out some of the best ways to specifically identify and map youth who are experiencing housing insecurity. And so there's some ways you can support there. Steve McNally, again, coming with the resources, brought up, and you can follow the link here, the Play Equity Fund, which focuses on bringing the transformational power of sport and play to all children, regardless of their race, gender, zip code, or socioeconomic status. So thanks, Steve, for putting that up there. And then Annie made the point too that we want our youth to dream and thrive, and we know this from a from a mental health standpoint, from behavioral health standpoint, from any honestly service-centered standpoint, that folks, it's not about simply presenting folks with resources that are available to them and expecting them to utilize them. There needs to be an inner drive that is centered on a hope that using these resources will actually make change in my life, that the change is really possible, especially after maybe years or maybe even generations of experiencing something other than that kind of hope and other than that kind of experience of real possibility of change. And so to the extent that we can help young people experience those key moments of life that that are meaningful and that connect to thriving, not simply, again, addressing an insecurity so that it's no longer an area of insecurity, but helping them thrive and dream, as Annie pointed out, is crucial, not only in general, because that's what we want for our youth, but also because that inspires and inculcates that kind of hope that drives someone forward, that produces the grit that Shelby was talking about, the kind of resilience that says, yes, I'm experiencing a challenge right now, but there are people out there who care, and there's a real possibility for change and thriving in my future, and even now. So I'm going to approach the question, the issue, the problem with that perspective, with a future mindset that says, this isn't permanent. Real change here can happen. That's what allows for the possibility of change and transformation at a heart and mind level. So my follow-up question to you, Shelby, some of the things you were just talking about, and if you want to comment on anything else that we just were saying, I welcome that as well. But you've been talking about really kind of these ideas of how change happens. And so I'm wondering if you can connect that to, I know that on the website, this is a kind of really lovely summary of this, but if you could talk a little bit about Project Hope Alliance's theory of change and why there is hope for youth and their families who are currently experiencing housing insecurity, to experience change and to escape the risk of chronic homelessness.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful. It's in our name, right? We're Project Hope. We do believe in hope. That is what gets us through, and because we see it every day. And then Alliance, we are collaborative. we are a community of generational disruptors, right? Like our team is from and currently lives in the communities that we serve. So we understand what it takes to escape generational poverty. So that always gives me goosebumps when I think of, when I actually sit and reflect on our name, I'm like, wow, we really are an alliance of hope. And Annie said it perfectly, like we want our youth to dream and thrive. And so our theory of change, I said it earlier, but I'll go, we see it happen through education, and that's why we're in the education system. It is a transformative tool. It is, I'm a first-gen college student, master's student, now doctoral student, and I can absolutely say with 100% certainty, and I came out of a UC. So I'm so passionate about public education. Then I went to University of Washington, another public institute. I was raised in public schools. Now I go to Cal State Long Beach. I truly believe that education is the tool to help us critically analyze, become curious, ask questions, view things differently. And for me and all of the youth that I see, our team, it really gives you confidence. Because yeah, there's imposter syndrome, but when you're sitting in a class with other college students and you're looking around, it's like, yeah, I'm here too. I got in the same place. And so we recognize that and we celebrate that wholeheartedly. And so I have a couple stories. Recently, we had a youth who we started 3.5 years ago living in a shelter with his dad. And now he just got his own apartment and he said, no, I'm going to live on my own. So he has a 1-bedroom apartment for himself. And he's like, my dad can do that. He's pursuing his post-secondary and he's working full time and he has his own apartment. So we know that he was able to do that with belief and hope. And then again, that tool of education. I think a lot of us are still reeling from the COVID pandemic, right? So we know that mental health has affected everyone. It's especially affected our youth experiencing homelessness, higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety. And so one of our biggest org value is meeting youth where they're at and doing whatever it takes. And so what that looks like is different for every youth. So it's not this structured program. Like our theory of change isn't, if you do X, then Y is going to happen, and then everything's going to work out. It's sometimes we're going to do this, maybe that's not going to work. Then we're going to go back here. And okay, now maybe there's a new barrier or a new challenge to address. And so we're just constantly, continuously learning with our youth and their families, and really helping to like dream, to believe in them. Like this high school graduation and our post-secondary, whether that's all of our youth that graduated, 100% of them had either full-time employment, went into service to the armed forces, or pursued post-secondary, whether that was a trade or the typical college route. So that is 100% of our youth have a plan, that there is hope, that, hey, I'm going to just keep going. And that's what we believe in. And that's what we offer for our youth. So that's really our theory, because we see it happening. It happened like with Jennifer Friend, right? Like she saw it as a kid. Now she runs the organization with that belief. And all of us are truly inspired by that and believe that as well.
That's excellent. I love it. You touched on this a little bit there, Shelby, in terms of the next question for you was, what are some of the common mental health impacts experienced by the youth that Project Hope Alliance works with, those youth who are experiencing or in families experiencing housing insecurity? You touched on, especially in conjunction with the kind of lingering impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, higher rates of depression and anxiety. But I've just opened the question up if there's anything else that are kind of common mental health impacts you see in terms of the youth that you all work with.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we realize as an organization is ACEs really matter. So adverse childhood experiences, right? We know that 100% of our youth are experiencing trauma. And what we know about ACEs, it's not just the presence of an ACE, it's actually the compounding ACEs and the long-term effects that it has on it. And more recently, they're including more than just the original 10 ACEs. They're including community poverty, community violence, more of poverty, because these are, a lot of our communities are cut off from a lot of the resources. And so what we do know is in the Surgeon General, their advisory, so mental health challenges affect with up to 1 in 5 children aged 3 to 17. Even more than that, our socioeconomically disadvantaged children are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop mental health conditions than their peers with higher SES, socioeconomic status. So that is, and then even more, there's a higher risk depending on race and ethnicity. So Latino youth, who we serve predominantly children of color. So I believe we're about 85% serving children of color, because more often there's a higher incidence for children of color experiencing poverty. And they're reporting higher rates of loneliness. So think about that. So they're already feeling alone. That is a crisis that we have. So sense of belonging and believing in them, that's huge. Low income youth are facing economic, educational, and social disruptions. So not only losing access to lunch, but losing access to peer groups. So during the pandemic, when everyone went virtual, that's actually where Project Hope Alliance, where we were really able to step in, because we are nimble. We're a nonprofit who works in the education system. We're able to fill those gaps that schools can't. So our team literally emptied our account, bought hotspots and laptops, because we knew where the families were living, and we drove around and delivered it to them. Because how can they access virtual school when they don't even have computer or Wi-Fi? Or when they're using a phone, there's multiple siblings. One of them goes on Monday, the next one goes on Tuesday, right? So that's what we're able to do, is immediately meet the need. You know, Jennifer always says, if you do the right thing, resources will come. And I think that's exactly what our model has proven and continues to prove. And so again, just to make sure I'm not just talking about the deficits of the needs, that's also what we're doing, is we're encouraging through like our partnerships. I'm constantly searching out new community partners for affordable mental health, to be proactive with that. And really that sense of belonging, stable, trusted adult, those are things that's really what we believe in. And that's how we show up every day for our youth.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating there that what I'm hearing you kind of highlight, Shelby, is not just the end result in terms of mental health challenges, things like depression or anxiety, but those factors that really increase incidence or risk for things like depression and anxiety, experiences of isolation, which, you know, we know from the Surgeon General's recent report on loneliness as an epidemic, especially impacts this age demographic. But when you dive a little bit further into the data, like you're touching on, not just does it impact TAY, but it also especially impacts TAY who are experiencing housing insecurity and other socioeconomic status related insecurities, but also those themselves have a higher incidence among children of color. And so the need to be mindful of speaking especially, or serving especially in those communities, because of the greater risk and the historic difficulties and challenges and inequities that still need to be addressed, but not only from a deficit point of view, but also in terms of building the building blocks for change in the future and for real hope. I posted here in the chat A couple of things on ACEs. I know we use this term in the mental health world so much, it's kind of become, in the best way, pervasive, but we can kind of lose the sense of what that means, or maybe, for example, somebody in our audience isn't familiar with it. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's a concept that comes from a study done in the late 90s through Kaiser that determined that initially they looked to focus on a set of 10 adverse experiences that often begin in childhood and that have mental health and physical health impacts and overall impacts on thriving well into adulthood, including even they discovered higher incidence of likelihood of ending up in the emergency room in later adulthood, simply because you had experienced these things as a child and there was no meaningful intervention that helped address or heal the wounds that came from those experiences. So there's some material there from the CDC. And then also I want to encourage everybody to check out PACES Connections, a great resource, not only on in general about ACEs, but also about some really great work that's happening. And you can actually, if you sign up for their newsletter, you can sign up locally to focus on Southern California and or Orange County, and they'll provide you a whole slew of information and resources about events that are happening here in our community around addressing this question, this issue of ACEs. But these things undergird one of the things that ACEs are likely to increase is an incidence of depression, anxiety, isolation, loneliness, those kinds of things. I want to follow up with just a couple more questions for you, and I'll kind of tie them together if you don't mind. I'm just because we're running up on time. Shelby, I'm really appreciative of you joining us. I'm really excited for folks to hear about the work of Project Hope Alliance, as well as to meet you and hear from your perspective, and for you to share your wealth of knowledge on this subject and experience. So here are my last two questions for you, and we'll pair them together. How can the community get involved with your work with Project Hope Alliance and the work that you all are doing? And then kind of on a broader perspective, homelessness is such a big topic lately, especially here in Southern California, especially for Orange County. If you could change one or two things about the conversation on a popular level that we've been having around homelessness and housing insecurity, what would they be? So how could people get involved? And if you could change a couple things about the conversation, what would you change?
I'll start with changing the conversation, and it goes into that. I think it also goes into the ACEs that you're talking about. When that first ACEs study occurred in the 90s, it was predominantly, if everyone's in Kaiser, that means everyone has insurance.
Yes, right.
Predominantly college educated, predominantly white participants. So since then, we're doing more and more research about ACEs and understanding. And I think this is also what I hope. So I know I keep talking about it, but really merging the definitions of homelessness, HUD and McKinney-Vento, I think is crucial, because without recognition, and if that invisibility is there, we're not meeting the needs, and it's only going to continue. But with that, I think having some empathy and understanding that trauma, when we're talking about ACEs, it physically changes your brain.
Mm-hmm.
You're feeling this when you're a kid, your brain is not developing at the same rate. So what that means is your emotional regulation is different. So oftentimes what that looks like in a classroom is maybe a kid is not paying attention or they're all over the place. But if we could look at it with compassion and understanding of maybe there's something more going on here, I think that would help a lot of kiddos not feel so alone, and maybe feel seen, which I think that's what we all want as humans. So I think really changing the conversation about homelessness, about trauma, and I'm just going to keep shouting it from the rooftops. McKinney-Vento is homelessness, and it's not just chronic homelessness on the street. In terms of how you can get involved, I love that question. We have so many ways to get involved. I will say the past couple weeks, this week we had a winter workshop. So we had a toy drive donation. And again, because we believe in the dignity of our families, we have a shop created for them that they go shop for toys and stockings. And then we have volunteers wrapping them and giving them, while they're being wrapped, they're getting to enjoy some pastries and hot chocolate. So volunteering with us is always really fun. As you know, especially our older youth, our TAY, snacks and food items are always really great. But again, because of that dignity, gift cards are really powerful, because rather than just giving them the food, we're giving them the choice of how to use that. So I think donations are always wonderful. And then of course, like maybe spreading the word about McKinney-Vento and what we're doing. I think we're always looking for connectors. If you're ever in a conversation of someone talking about homelessness, of, hey, I was just in a webinar on that. I heard of this organization. I think, or if there's any other resources out there that maybe we're not using, we always want to know more resources for our families and our youth. So all of that is ways to get involved. My contact information, I'm always open to partnerships. Again, we just had the Pacific Symphony, we had a quartet come and play for our youth downstairs. So really exposure is really big as well. So if there's any kind of events, arts, a STEM camp, a financial awareness, anything like that, that you're like, oh, sometimes we take them for granted. We always want to like that exposure, increase awareness of those for our youth.
Shelby, thank you. Thank you to you. Thank you to Project Hope Alliance for the work you all do. Thank you for joining us today and sharing again your experience and expertise, your knowledge, your perspective. I'll end with this. You used a word there that I think is so crucial, and it's a theme that's come up a little bit in our conversation. Is you use the word dignity, right? And dignity is deeply connected with the quality of reverence we have for our fellow human beings, the kind of care and connection and empathy that we might have, the experience of seeing and being seen. And I think, something that I want to encourage everybody, and the point of time count is a great way to get started there. Connecting with Shelby and Project Hope Alliance can also be a really great way, but having conversations with those who are experiencing housing insecurity or even chronic homelessness can be transformative, not only for them, but also for us, because whenever we have somebody in our community who is experiencing something that, for any number of reasons, because it's isolating, because they're not seen, because they feel discarded, is dehumanizing, it dehumanizes us as well. And so when we have that capacity for real human connection, especially ones that can change our perspective, to see someone and to be seen and to have the experience of seeing another, it can be profoundly humanizing and reintroduce dignity to our neighbors, and honestly dignity to ourselves, in a way that is honestly at the very foundation of how we change what we do and how we think about homelessness and housing insecurity in our community. So again, Shelby, thank you for joining us and taking the time. We'll shift gears now to talk a little, do our usual thing, our updates and so on. I mentioned earlier, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Sarah to talk about some Connective C updates, and then we'll connect with you all and see what kind of updates you have for us. But I mentioned earlier that we did something in the a little over last week on Instagram Live around this topic of seeing and being seen, and having conversations and hearing people's stories around the issue of homelessness and housing insecurity. And so I'll let Sarah take it from there, and any other updates you have about what we're doing Connective C.
Yeah, thanks, David. Great conversation. I really appreciated all the insight and just all the good, sweet, like, information that we can take home with us and apply, and just get involved in any way we can. It's so awesome. But yeah, like David said, we just did an IG Live with Ariel Zapia from Project Y. And it's really good just to hear what she's doing and the stories that she's heard, and checking out like her podcast that she has and her website and her book that just came out. So she's doing a lot of things for the homeless population, and just elevating their stories and their voices and raising more awareness about the topic. So definitely check that one out, check her out. She's really awesome. And I think that is our only update. So I will open it up to all of you. If you have any updates on your end, please feel free to or either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and I'll give you the floor.
Hi, this is Leslie with the City of Mission Viejo, and just you did mention quite a bit, David, about the point in time, and I know Shelby was on that meeting yesterday. I'm very concerned that we're about 10 years behind with counting TAY in the point in time count. We're making some progress, but also we're going backwards. So at this point, listening to what I heard yesterday, I think we need to activate the coalition, the youth advocates in this committee, to bombard CityNet, who are a very compassionate organization, by the way, but they need direction as to how do we increase the numbers from 700 to upwards toward the thousands that we know that are literally homeless. I'm suggesting that each of us reach out to our local community college, as well as local colleges, you know, Fullerton, you name it, try to figure out who is in charge of the student health center, any other engagement location, so that they're aware that this count is going on. There was some discussion about, you know, from Covenant House about, you know, having the students come to campus. I agree with Shelby. I don't think that works necessarily, but if somehow we can propose that those that are regularly attending food pantries and are regularly receiving health services get counted. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, but we have to push it. Let's put it this way. In 2017, TAY wasn't even part of the count. And 2019, we started talking about it. We made some inroads. 2022, I don't know what happened. And now we're back. It's 2024. We have more homeless kids ever, and we're behind. So that's what I would suggest. I put in the chat who to talk to. Matt Bates is one, and then the other gentleman, Brian Culverson, I think is his name. Reach out to him, and then Sarah Jones with the Office of Care Coordination, so that she knows we need to do better. This is one of the focus points. They mentioned seniors, veterans, and TAY. So we need to really get involved in that. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else have any updates for us?
Becca has an update. Here, let me in the chat. We have an upcoming training on January 11th. I'll post flyer in the chat. It's about compassion and SUD. It's open to everyone as long as you are RSVP. So especially for community organizations that do work directly with these populations. So we can get a compassionate view of substance use disorder, harm reduction, and defining referral and treatment pathways from CBO to FQHCs. Yeah, there's an RSVP link, and all are welcome. I believe there's going to be food. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Matthew. Anyone else? Okay. I will end us there. One last thing on our end, before we get off, we do post our past coalition meetings as well as other events on our website. If you go to connect-oc.org/events, you can check out all the events that we've done, including that Instagram live that I did last week with Ariel, and then other past coalition meetings as well as other events that are coming up in the community. So please feel free to check that out and get involved in any ways you can. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate your giving up your time for this, and we hope you have a very happy holiday season. Get lots of rest, eat lots of good food, and spend time with family. So thanks, everyone.
We'll see you all back in January, last Friday of the month.